Well, thank you so much. And this, I think, is our final panel of the day, which is very sad because it's been such a marvelous day. We have a really fascinating group of people here to talk about reimagining leadership. You've heard a couple of my colleagues who are professors at the London Business School really describing with huge vigor and vim how the world has got to change and will change. But of course, the question to our industry leaders is how much do you see that happening? So before I sit down, let me just introduce each one to you. Can I introduce, first of all, Greg Case, who's the CEO of Aon, that employs 66,000 people around the world, really global, and works in the field of global risk management and insurance solutions. So I suppose, in a way, in our group here, Greg represents the person who's leading a huge workforce, very globally distributed, and must be facing some amazingly interesting issues, which I'm sure we'll hear about at any moment. Can I secondly introduce Richard Peters, who's the co-founder and CEO of Decoded. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard of Decoded. It's the group that's really helping people around the world to code in a day. And it got the UK, it came out as one of the UK's top 5 most innovative companies. So in a way, I suppose, Richard represents how entrepreneurs are changing the world, and also, of course, with that view on how coding will change, particularly interesting, of course, in terms of the conversation we've just had. And finally, Isa Vidra, who is an alumni of London Business School, head of the campus in Google, based in London, and it's a campus for entrepreneurs. So he's leading a hub which is helping bring entrepreneurs into a physical place that they can work with each other. And I'm sure we'll hear in a moment just what is happening on that. So let me join the group. I wanted really to start by asking each of you, we've all heard a great deal today about how technology is going to change the world and the future. And I just wanted to ask each of you in your own words, how do you see that happening in your own company? I mean, easy, let's start with Google, because of course that's one of the technology companies that everyone's looking up to. What do you see really changing?
You know, there's a famous quote saying that you can ask me to predict anything but the future. So I'll take that caveat that it's very hard to predict things, but maybe I can share one personal example that I've experienced at campus. So I'm the head of Google for Entrepreneurs in Europe, and I've set up Google's first physical hub for entrepreneurs in East London. It's actually a couple of blocks away. It's called Campus London. And really early into the project, it's a 7-story building filled with startups. There's thousands of entrepreneurs coming through the doors every day. And really early into this journey, we realized that there's a real risk of, there's too much work to do. I was one person, and there's a real risk of burning out. And Google has this concept of 20% time, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Just as a raise of hands, if I need to explain it. How many of you are familiar with 20% time? Okay, about half. So essentially, you're hired to do one job, but you can spend 20% of your time dedicating your skills and applying them on a different area of the business as a passion project. So historically, this was very popular with engineers, but there hasn't been many opportunities for non-engineers to do this. And I was very lucky and able to put about 10 roles that I needed help with of 20% projects, and about 50 people applied. I interviewed 25, and I ended up hiring 10 people. They had their full-time job at Google, but they also spent a day a week working for campus and applying their expertise. So if you ask me how is work going to change in the future, I think one of the trends is going to have to be this flexible focus, because the Maslow pyramid of needs didn't change over the years. People still want self-realization, and today they just have many more ways to achieve this self-realization. If you as an employer don't account for that, either they find a way to do it after work, but ideally they find a way to come to work motivated, self-realize themselves, and also do something that's productive for the business and ideally for society as well. So I've since had about 40 20%ers. There's about 350 Googlers that volunteer mentoring startups at campus. We did 1,000 mentorship sessions last year alone. And it's just an example of how you can use your existing talent, embrace their skills, and apply it in other areas.
So just let me ask the audience here, how many people in here are in a company where you have 20% of your time to do whatever you like? Does anyone have that? Could you just put your hand up if you do? Maybe we could just have some lights. I see 3 hands.
There's a few more.
Is it? Maybe you're more,
maybe they're from Google.
You're a more optimistic counter than I am. So one of the things that I want to ask, and I'll come back to it as we progress, is that I write about the future of work, and I've, written a lot of case studies on how companies are changing. But what's really incredibly interesting for me is actually that these great practices that companies are talking about, and I know we're going to hear about more, most companies don't use. And we've seen that, with the representative sample here. So let's hold on to that, but maybe we can come back to the case that you think has made a big difference to you and to Google.
Yes, absolutely.
And yet most people in this room don't experience it.
Some of Google's most popular products, including Gmail, started as 20% projects. So it's, Professor Hamill talked about experimentation, and Google is an example of a company that's still founder-led that continues to disrupt itself. And I think what makes it unique and what enables a lot of companies to do this is not betting the farm on innovation and saying, we have to change everything, but taking little bets and experimenting. And a 20% project and products that come out from this process are an example. So Google truly believes that ideas can come from anywhere. So even when I joined the company initially to do strategic partnerships, I was able to submit an idea a week to this internal board, and I wrote a couple of patents. My background is product management, and I came to Google to do partnerships until Google recognized that the idea was valid and enabled me to write 2 patents on it. So I think that there's a bunch of things around culture and DNA of the company that enable you to do this. It would be very hard to start this from scratch in like an old-fashioned business, but the little bets point, I think, is important. You have to experiment and start small.
Okay, because one of the things I thought we might try and do in our session today is to come up with the 5 things that you think people in the audience should be thinking about. So your number 1 is give people 20% time. There are the cynics that say that the 20% time at Google is actually the weekends. Is that true? Am I the only person who's heard that?
There's a funny Dilbert that says, Dilbert is talking to a Google employee, and he's like, I work for Google, and I have 20% time. And he's like, oh, yeah? And how many hours a week do you work? And he's like, 60.
Yes.
So in many cases, 20% can be 120%, but when you're truly motivated, and this is a passion project, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like work. So, people just amazed me and exceeded my expectations wildly just by providing them the platform, a little bit of direction and resources, whether it's like budget or a community that they can experiment with. And the results have been incredible. I don't want to get into too many examples, but I'll be happy to talk to you afterwards.
Richard, you run a business that's completely based on passion, isn't it? I mean, it was your passion and the passion of others that said, we will make this happen.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'll just sort of echo what we're talking about here before, which is unlocking talent. Talent was something you said before, and I think we kind of see the world from 2 angles. We see it from the angle of all our clients, who see talks like John before and are incredibly inspired by those talks, but also quite fearful. Yeah. That world feels very nebulous. Yeah. They're not quite sure how to access their talent, how to get people within their organisation to do the machine learning, to understand technology. It kind of still feels like they're trying to grab it. So we see a kind of a fear on that side, and we also see a lack of appreciation of their own talent and how they can get that, and also a legacy. They're all kind of bound by legacy issues of what's happened in the past. So how do we change? We're big. How do we move forward? Comparing it to us, we're very lucky because we're starting from a complete blank sheet of paper. Yeah. And technology is absolutely the heart of how we want to transform the business. And it was very much a vision of having a very clean, a very clear business in which we kind of reduced all that, all the stuff that people don't want to do, all the process, and just allow people to be thinking, to be innovating, to use their intelligence to develop the business and push it forward. So we don't have a 20% sort of time, but everyone who works within the business is incredibly passionate about that business. And we just let them, release their passions. But we're lucky, we don't have everything in place that someone who's got 67,000 people have in place. And we do see that with our clients. And I think from our perspective, it's about going back to your talent base and unlocking that talent. We don't think it needs great swathes of people being made redundant and great swathes of new people coming in. We think it's there. We think the talent is latent.
When you said clean business, that sort of reminded me of what Gary was talking about when he talked about hacking bureaucracy. I mean, could you give us an example of something that you do specifically that you think creates a clean, less bureaucratic company?
Yeah, I mean, we open up all our data.
Okay.
So, and it's something, so you talked about code there. Actually, there are three pillars to, we believe, digital enlightenment. There's code, which is understanding the framework of the world. There's data, which is getting that value, and there's technology with how you interact with it. But we open up all our data to everybody internally, and we encourage people to use data to make their world better. So, for example, our designers are all coders as well. So they have access to all our data. They're able to create beautiful designs. They're able to create communications that uses the data from our organisation. But a way of making that clean, I'm trying to come back to your question. So our head of content, our head of brand, is also a coder, and he also has access to the data for all our clients. And he thought, well, actually, there's a process here where we've got a group of 10 people coming in from Google or whoever it might be. The client team go around and they put together a report and they put together a PDF and they look at all the feedback and they make it beautiful and they send it out. He goes, that's a waste of 3 or 4 hours of someone's time. I'm going to automate all of that. Right. I'm going to use the data. I'm going to open up the API that we have internally, and I'm going to make it so you press a button and you're able to kind of slightly move stuff around.
When you say data, I don't really know what you mean. When you say you open up the data, what is it you're talking about?
So, for example, our client data.
Data like what?
So, who our clients are, how they performed. We track every keystroke that they code or they build their technology on. We track everything about our clients, so we understand the learning process, and we understand how they're learning and make that learning better. We understand how they performed. We understand what they liked. We understand what they didn't like. We understand how they interact with other people within that group. And so everything about that client, that customer, is saved, but is also open so anyone can access it. So this client, this head of brand, head of content, he took that data and he said, I'm going to make the perfect report for that client, and it's going to be something that is automated, not something that requires a load of process. And by doing stuff like that, we want as least operations as possible. We want as little people doing stuff they don't enjoy doing. We want people being inspired the entire time. So I guess that is the one example I can bring.
That's so fascinating, yeah. Well, Greg, in many ways, of course, you're the most unfortunate person on
the
this.
dinosaur.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, you're not the dinosaur, but you're the one who's actually running a legacy business with 66,000 people. Do you give people 20% time off?
Well, I'm looking about the 20% time.
Yeah,
I'm intrigued by the Sunday. That's a good idea too.
What do you? Yes, that would be bad, wouldn't it? Giving people a Sunday off. What do you think about this idea that Richard's got to do with opening up all the data? Do you do that?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, just Aon is a firm with 67,000 colleagues. Yeah. That's true. We do touch risk and people, true. But the reason I really wanted to be here and really appreciate just hearing Easy and Richard talk about what they're doing is, fundamentally, we want to change the world of risk. We want to help clients understand, measure, mitigate risk, and really change the global economy through the lens of risk. And we want to do the same thing through the lens of people, thinking about, frankly, talent and health and retirement. If we can change the global economy on those two areas, we've fundamentally had real impact. We fully recognize without an evolution in technology and data and insight, we're not going to make it happen. In fact, we're going to lose. We've got to get ahead of that game. Our view is if we don't innovate faster than our clients on the topics of risk and people, we fundamentally lose. And that's forced us to do a lot. Spend hundreds of millions of dollars on data, which, by the way, in the end, we have found not helpful until you translate data into information, information into insight, and insight into changes in client behavior. If fundamentally you don't change client behavior, you've created no economic value. Therefore, you've got no impact. And what these gentlemen are describing rings true in so many different ways. I find myself thinking about, though, how do you take these great ideas and scale them across 67,000 colleagues? And more important, how do you scale it across a set of clients who've got a set of fundamental issues? So our view is, I happen to operate in an industry that has a lot of data, much less insight, and our whole effort is translating data into insight and doing it in a way that clients can measure economic value. So our view is operating performance, balance sheet strength, and reducing volatility. If we can take specific actions inside of clients that will drive value in a unique way, we can create value. So yes, we're taking efforts around data, around analytics, some of the most fundamental things we're doing in the firm, and the innovations really come from our colleagues, the insights they bring to the table, and from our clients as we listen to our clients around what their issues are. So I can very much relate to what these colleagues are talking about.
So in terms of the 5, insights that we'd like to bring from this session, what would be your specific insight from what you've learned doing, the process you've described?
I don't know if we can sort of call it one insight, but what I would observe, just listening to the conversation, it is the translation of this whole broad conversation into impact. And by the way, that requires innovation too. Because you can churn for hours and years and decades on data analysis and not translate it into insight. And I think really understanding client need and translating the data, the analytics into something that's tangible for a client is fundamental. That's really what makes Aon go. And I would guess that's where your startups are going to have impact. That's where your business is going to have impact. If you don't translate it into something, an action, then it's an interesting analysis, a nice little speech, but it doesn't really produce results.
And what's the process by which you would translate this into action? I mean, what is it that you do that allows you to do that, do you think?
I'll give you one quick example. So a lot of our clients around the world worry about global supply chain. Many of you probably touch global supply chain. By the way, for years and years and years, everyone's tried to develop a global supply chain primarily so they could reduce cost. What that's actually done fundamentally is reduce costs. They've had great success with that. Our clients have also, though, introduced substantial volatility, variation into their supply chain. And so data and analytics can actually help you measure volatility versus cost reduction. So you're in essence saying to a client, what's more important to you? Increases in EPS or volatility of EPS? If you actually understood that trade-off truly for a manufacturer globally, you'd be making very specific and very different decisions you'd make if you were just doing cost optimization. Mm-hmm. That's, by the way, one teeny tiny little sliver all through data and analytics. If you don't track exactly what's going on all the options, you fundamentally can't help a client make a different decision. If you can't do that, they can't change behavior, and they can't actually improve their economic performance. That's one little sliver.
So just the data and the analytics, that sounds to me like a very specialized job to be able to do that. I mean, one of the things that people are talking about at the moment is this notion of hollowing out of work, that if you take a look at the skill sets around, then the middle have disappeared. The middle set of skills have gone. The medium level skills have gone because they've either been automated or outsourced. And what's left is jobs that are becoming more difficult, more complex, more specialized, or jobs that are relatively easy to do and for all sorts of reasons can't be replaced. But Greg, just one of the things that really came across when you spoke is that you must have some pretty talented people around to be able to do that data analytics.
Yeah, but we have got some great colleagues, and they've fundamentally hired more and more. I'll have to be talking to these gentlemen as we walk off the stage. But about their colleagues, of course, not them, per se.
LBS will take its normal 20% on that
exactly.
one, by the way.
But I would offer, yes, it's an important skill, but don't lose sight. We have 67,000 colleagues who've done wonderful work over time, and to the extent we can use data and analytics to take someone who's actually been a broker for many years and give them a level of insight to, for example, do instant benchmarking globally around the placement of risk or understanding of risk. So cyber is a big deal. So what's going on in cyber? If we can actually, from an analytics standpoint, give someone a true global view of that in their back pocket, and they can deliver that to a client, we're actually taking a role, and actually we're making it much, much more powerful. And in essence, taking someone, as long as they don't, and there's an amount of concern here too, we're not replacing what you do, we're in fact helping you do what you've done historically much better, much faster, much more powerful, and to the extent we use data and analytics. So we run $100 billion of risk every year. If we get the data and analytics around that correct, we don't, but if we got it correct, that's non-duplicatable differentiated value. That, in the hands of a broker, same person, fundamentally changes how they can do business. So we're very careful around, it absolutely disruptive, but let's be clear, our colleagues are exceptional and they evolve. We all have to evolve.
How many people here, can you just put the lights up, think that their job will be replaced by data analytics within the next 10 years? Hands up if you think that's the case. Just one person. I think ours might be, in fact, at business school professors. So, I mean, Greg, the research currently suggests that 67% of work will be replaced by data analytics. So I can't believe that you're saying that you're just giving all that stuff to people and they're still, I mean, why would you need to have the salesperson to do it if the data analytics is doing it for them?
I think be careful of the power of evolution versus the power of replacement. We're not saying your job's not going to be fundamentally different, but, and by the way, if you can't evolve, you might be replaced. But if you can evolve, the difference between actually a personal relationship with truly powerful insight is pretty fundamental in our world. We typically serve companies, by the way, as opposed to individuals. And we are seeing disruptive technology come in and truly replace the personalized parts of our business pretty fundamentally. But so for us, we're not suggesting it's one or the other, but there's a big difference between evolution and development and just fundamental replacement. We're open to both. And by the way, in essence, we're attacking our business every day. But we've seen tremendous benefit in the evolution of our colleagues using data and analytics to give them greater insight to serve clients more effectively.
So just carrying on with this question about evolution, what do you think are some of the key skills that people are going to need to be able to hold on to their jobs and not be the 67% of people who are going to lose it through data analytics? I mean, what's your view on that?
I think iteration and not perfection. We talk a lot about failure in the startup world, and there's big businesses are afraid of failure, and like as an employee, if you fail, that you can have really severe consequences. So what I would like to see is more of this evolution of minimum viable product coming to large companies as well, where most startups fail not because they fail to develop their market. Not because they fail to develop their product, but because they fail to develop their market. And with big companies, it's still like we're going to think about the perfect product, and then we're going to release it, and then we're going to distribute it. And sometimes they are able to achieve some level of success because of their distribution power and just practically dollars spent. But startups are able to do this very, very nimbly. So I think the workforce of tomorrow will have to adopt this concept of experimentation, and let's see if this works differently, because things were done in one way until now. And if we continue to do the same things, we'll get the same results. So I really relate to your point about insights versus data. So if you have these new insights, how does it change what you're going to do tomorrow? Because obviously you have to change, you have to evolve. So I think it comes back to this measurable experimentation and continue to constantly test new parameters.
How many people here have run a measured experiment? Oh, about 20 people. When we were writing about experimentation, and Gary and I have talked about this for some years, it's actually incredibly hard to find examples of companies who do measured experimentation. I know we've given examples today, but why is it so hard?
I think it depends on what your product is and how you test it. Like when I was managing vertical search for Ask.com in the Valley, I was running over 30 experiments at any given time. And this is testing 50 shades of blue, for example, to see what people click on more. Expanding the font or the sizing of the font or the distance from the cursor, etc. So it's very easy to test stuff in technology, and if you have enough traction, you're able to very quickly get to conclusions.
What about experimentation with management, which is what Gary was talking about? I mean, what about how do you experiment with how you manage people? Have you used experimentation with how you manage people?
I've used I tried different things. I guess you can call it experimentation. It's less obvious with people, because if the experiment goes wrong, it can really have like bad consequences. But what I like to say about that is that I tend to say yes a lot, and experiment with, projects or ideas, and then if you can test it on a small scale, little budget, and you get a positive result, it's always replicable. You can, build more resources. But I guess my experiments go in trusting people to try something new.
Yeah. Greg?
Well, there's, by the way, less experimentation, more trying, I guess I would start with. But the whole role that technology plays as you think about enabling talent-based experimentation, or really just evolution of your organization, we find we wake up days and it's stunning. In essence, our 67,000 colleagues are spread out in 120 countries around the world. Yeah. The power of Aon is not just the individuals, it's the connectivity. Yeah. We call it Aon United. When we connect our global firm, we are so much more powerful. By the way, how do we connect our global firm in a firm that historically hasn't been connected? You reach to technology, you try things, you work together, you try to support each other. You also have to have a set of incentives that reinforce that, which, by the way, haven't historically been the case. This is a real problem, right? You can say it, and it's nice, and it's theoretical, but in the end, how do you make it happen? So we work really hard at trying to use different approaches, technology, connectivity. By the way, that connectivity means a lot of times it didn't come from me, right? Long gone are the days where, somebody at the top or at the bottom, wherever you sort of calibrate a CEO, says, here's what's going on, and everybody goes, yes, because everybody's talking to each other. So if there's not consistency between what you're saying around the mission and the objectives of the firm and what your colleagues are saying, this is tremendously accelerating. Either you accelerate positively or you accelerate negatively. Technology means you are not staying the same, period. And so we think the organizational implications, the talent implications, as both of you were mentioning at the beginning, are quite profound as it relates to the application of technology and running a global firm.
And what would be the biggest talent implication, do you think?
Well, first and foremost, if you think about sort of the ability to align an organization globally and to drive engagement, which, by the way, creates the engine for the 20%, or the idea of the 20%. The difference between a set of colleagues who are excited about a mission and driving it, and those who are kind of lukewarm, is a massive difference in the impact on clients. By the way, a massive difference on performance. Our research suggests 10 to 20 points of difference in terms of overall financial performance. So, for us, implications are very profound. And, we don't call it experimentation because we like to pretend like we've got a good game plan and we're getting it right. But we try lots of things over and over again and try different approaches to try to create greater connectivity around the global firm. And we find that's fundamental to what we do.
I'd like to pick up on something you said before, which is about talent and difference between data analytics and everybody else. And I think we'd seen in the past a massive outsource of the doing, which was great, but also a huge outsource of the thinking. Yeah. So all that thinking of data, of analytics, of machine learning, of the digital world had been passed over to those people that were doing it. And that was the big dip in our kind of digital literacy or our technological literacy within the business. And I have to say that everyone who comes, and we've had thousands and thousands of people from boards of FTSE 100 companies all the way through to the equivalent over in the US and Asia. And none of them want to give up their jobs, whether the CEO, whether the FD, whether the CMO. They just want to be better at it, and they just want to have that grasp. They don't want to become data analysts. They just want to conceptually understand what is possible and what is possible within their passion. People's passions haven't changed. People still want to do what they came into the business to do. They just want to do it better. And I think people are grasping hold of that. And it's very encouraging. People are grabbing it, with both hands. And when you did the show of hands there, how many people are going to be replaced? I think maybe one. One side negative. But most people, no, I'm not going to be replaced. I'm just going to get better. And as you say, it's about evolution. And it's about evolution of a workforce. And I think, it's an incredibly positive time, because I think the actual technology you can get hold of is much easier to comprehend. And Google have, played a huge role in that. And being able to access technology in a very human way is I think, the big revolution.
I'm going to open up for questions, but before I do that, let me summarize what I think was our 5 takeaways, and then you can add or elaborate. And whilst I'm doing that, you may want to think about the questions that you would like to ask. So, first takeaway is, although none of us are doing it, 20% time to think and experiment and do interesting things is something that you would recommend. Number 2, Richard's point, create a clean business. That's a very nice word, isn't it? You know, not less bureaucratic, and do that by opening up the data so everybody can see everything, and that makes it easier for them to sort of play around with it. Number 3, and this was something, Greg, that you spoke about, which was the whole question about build insight through data and analytics. Number 4, which is, I think, everybody's speaking of this, which is that there's an evolution which you build through experimentations. And number 5, Greg, your point about it's all about connectivity now. Anything to add to that before I open up for questions?
I would love to hear the questions.
Okay, let's get on with questions. Right, who's up first? Could you say who you are and where you're from? Yes, please, Gita Piramel. I'm sorry, I don't know everybody in this audience, but I do know Gita. Who's a research fellow at Oxford.
We heard today that the average time that employees stay in a company is about 18 months. Especially in the US. In India, it is under 2 years. We heard about data being open, personal, very sensitive, competitive information, profiles of people. How do you secure that data?
How do you secure?
The data in terms of respecting privacy.
That's a good question.
A competitive advantage. With people who may not stay more than 2 years.
I must say, I was thinking about that as well when you talked about opening up the data. I mean, presumably, you're opening up some very sensitive data.
I think there's a big, I don't know how Google feel, but I think that there's a big cultural, when we have clients come on board, the big cultural shift they cannot get their head around is open source. Yes. Open source data, open source code, open source technology. Why? They spend their entire business life learning to keep everything closed and locked down. What is the benefit of opening stuff up? Yeah. And it is challenging, and we're going to start doing that with a lot of our work. We're going to open up our platforms. If you look at someone like Twitter, when they opened up some of their work, what they got back was 10 times what they could have done themselves, and then they're able to use that, and their brand is strong, etc., etc. It's a very brave business that opens up their data and allows people to play with it and improve it, and for you to be confident enough as a brand to say, that's going to have a positive effect back on me, because that cultural idea of we must hold on to everything. But if you hold on to everything, it might not grow as quickly.
Yes.
So it's a mind shift. It's a massive mind shift from the last 10 years.
I'm writing a case about TCS with the CEO of TCS, a guy called Chandra, and they came to the same conclusion that if you want to build a business that can evolve quickly, and they employ now 360,000 people, they need to open up the data. And that requires a very high level of trust, doesn't it? Because they're dealing with very commercially sensitive data.
Even more than trust, though, part of implicit in the question, very good question, is that the data is the competitive advantage. Yeah. And if the data is the competitive advantage, you're vulnerable, sort of in the worlds that are being described, completely opened up. The issue is if you can translate the data into, again, insight, have a process to do that, that's actually the platform which is differentiated. Yeah. Then, by the way, you accelerate that. And the more data and the more content, the better you are on the platform. Then you ask the question, is your platform duplicatable? And if it is, you're still vulnerable. If it's not, you've got a competitive advantage that might be sustainable. If not, you better go back and think about it. When I describe the supply chain effort, by the way, we keep our data, so we protect it. So to be clear, we don't have open data. We have Aon's data and our clients' proprietary data. So I'm working on drinking this Kool-Aid. This is very good. But
you can drink the 20% whilst you're at it.
Exactly. That's what I need to do. But what's clear to us is we've been able to amass enough data that it isn't about that, it's about the process. The process is largely non-duplicatable in the world of risk we live in and the world of health and talent we live in. That, in our view, is the competitive advantage. And I think what these gentlemen are saying is that's a completely different mindset than the whole mindset of, it's all about proprietary, benchmark data. It's all about proprietary cost data. It's got to go beyond that if we're talking about what they're describing.
I would just say I agree. Google is a company that measures everything. We really embrace data. But I would say that there's two separate issues here. One is culture, and we believe that open will win, and we are extremely open with our data internally. Of course, we keep customers' information and privacy is the utmost importance. But internally, when we talk about kind of like company policy, strategy, etc., every time there's a Google board meeting, every employee gets an email saying like, what's going to happen in this board meeting? This is what we're going to talk about. So it's extreme openness that I haven't experienced in any other company, and it's truly gratifying being part of an organization that is changing the world in many ways, to be part of this journey and feel like they trust me with this information. Of course, there's consequences if I go and leak confidential information and put it on Twitter because I think it's cool. I'm going to get fired on the spot. So you have to, it's kind of like with great force comes great responsibility. So internally, culture, you can manage how people use the data. Externally, be generous with your data. If you can provide people insights, do it. And Google is in a position where we constantly try to help, whether it's different communities or consumers or our users to use data for their benefit. Whether it's a microsite for the World Cup, where if you search for World Cup trends on Google, you will get a microsite that was done just for the World Cup. You may have not heard about it, but it's taking a lot of data about search and the games and statistics and packaging it really nice to you, or helping girls to code, or enabling people to put their own data on the map or on the internet, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's a great question. It's not a simple answer, that you have to be very sensible about clients' data and proprietary data, but on the other hand, be very generous and embrace openness as a principle of innovation.
Thank you so much. Next question. Who's going to ask the next question? Yeah. Marcus Alexander.
Hello, Marcus Alexander, a faculty member at London Business School. First of all, I've been absolutely fascinated with the comments and so on, but a challenge I get from a lot of companies I work with is, this is all great for TMT and for risk management, financial services, but a lot of us are in completely different sorts of environment. And part of me thinks, yeah, that's true, but isn't there a lot that is learning for a wider group? Just wondered if you had comments on that.
Mm-hmm. So Marcus's question is, what could some of your ideas be used for other types of industries beyond your? I mean, let's go on. You talked a lot. I mean, really, for me, Greg, your takeaway is that you have this data, but what really adds value is the insight and the way that you build insights around those data. Right. I mean, is that something? Yeah,
listen, I think it's completely transportable everywhere. I mean, Aon serves, in the worlds of risk and people, really, we're a global focus group. We serve the biggest companies in the world, medium-sized companies, small companies, less pure personal, but some. And 80% of our business is middle market, small commercial in every country in the world and in every sector of the world. So all the financial services companies, all the manufacturing companies. So from our standpoint, the concepts about value added, at the end of the day, it isn't about Aon at all. It's about, can we help them improve their performance? And them is all these companies. So our view is this has high applicability, everywhere. And I got to believe Google feels that, times two, in terms of sort of the applicability, because it isn't about the industry. It is about literally how you use data and analytics to change behavior, that drive value. And that is a lesson, at least from our humble view, that is applicable in a lot of places.
I had a look at who was on the course last week on some of our data courses, and we had in the same session a beekeeper, a CTO of a telco company, and a doctor. Wow. So medtech's massive, obviously telco's massive. I had no idea that the world of honey was so into tech, but why not? It's business. It's got consumers. It's got information, it's got data. I don't know what they're doing with the weather, whatever it might be, but across the board, we haven't found anybody in any sector, business or NGO or anywhere, that isn't interested in this in thinking about
data. Easy.
I would just reframe the question and ask, can big companies learn from startups and from this lean innovation process? And my answer would be absolutely, but it's very hard to do this overnight. So it's understanding what applies to your business. Try little bets. Again, don't bet the farm on it, but set up a little bit of budget to try an experiment and use technology in a different way in the business. And innovation doesn't mean that you have to buy startups. You can just be a customer of startups. There are great minds out there that are solving the very same problems that you're dealing with, and they would love to have you, the big business, as a customer. So, just pay the subscription fee or become their case study as a customer, and they will actually go and develop features that are specifically relevant for you. And I think that this is the main point that I would say. It's become a consumer of innovation before you start innovating yourself.
Wow, thank you. Well, thank you so much to Easy, Richard and Greg for an absolutely fantastically interesting panel. It is the final, sadly, the final panel of today, but I hope we managed to keep the conversation moving along. So thank you so much to our three panelists. Oh, thank you, Greg. Thank you so much.